James, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
So symbolism, pomp, and circumstance are as important as multi-billion-dollar agreements during the Chinese president's visit to Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. Both Chinese President Xi Jinping and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have an interest in projecting this as being a milestone event, which it actually isn't. Sure, it's the first visit overseas outside of Central and East Asia by Xi Jinping in 3 years because of the pandemic. But there are regular high-level meetings, and there are regular meetings in which billions of dollars in contracts are signed. What makes this one different is that the Saudis want to use it as leverage in terms of negotiating going forward what the relationship with the United States will be. One thing to keep in mind as a final remark is that neither the Chinese nor the Saudis want the United States to leave the Middle East. They want the United States to remain the security guarantor. What they do, however, want is for that to be precisely defined.
Now, Morocco's World Cup success says a lot about the fluidity of borders.
Indeed. Half of the Moroccan national team are diaspora Moroccans, primarily from Europe. So, with other words, those borders between Africa, Asia, Europe are increasingly becoming blurred, certainly on the pitch. What I do think you're seeing is there's greater euphoria and enthusiasm, and rightfully so, for the Moroccan team. I think you're going to see, in terms of lasting effect, that evaporate very quickly. These kind of moments in soccer have never contributed to a lasting change.
Now, the UAE president was playing his cards, all the cards, in a day, visiting Qatar, receiving the Israeli president, and meeting with the Taliban.
Absolutely. So you had Mohammed bin Zayed, as well as his closest family members, for the first time since before the economic and diplomatic boycott of Qatar in 2017, visit the Gulf state. And that was a major thing, also because you still do not have a UAE ambassador in Doha more than almost 2 years after the boycott was lifted. So that's significant. At the same time, you had the Israeli President Herzog visiting the UAE, and Mohammed bin Zayed flying very quickly back to Abu Dhabi to receive the president. Keep in mind that the UAE is the only foreign country that at this point has engaged with Israel's far right, inviting Itamar Ben Gvir, the far right, presumably a minister who's going to be in charge of national security issues, or in any case, policing of national security issues, if a Netanyahu government comes to office. He was invited to the National Day celebrations of the UAE, and days later, the ambassador met in Jerusalem with the leader of religious Zionism, Smotrich. So that was a very significant meeting. And then finally, and in some ways in competition with Qatar, Mohammed bin Zayed met with the Taliban. The UAE just scored a major victory in competition with the Qataris in terms of who would get the contract for security at Afghanistan's international airports, including Kabul.
And then the Biden administration debating how to deal with far-right elements of a potential Netanyahu government.
Indeed. So we were just talking about the probable new Israeli government. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a majority in parliament, if indeed he can put together a coalition, which it looks like he is doing, with the far right in Israel. These are people in favor of expelling Palestinians who are, quote, disloyal to Israel, annexation of territories occupied in 1967, and go down the list. And so for the Biden administration, this really forms a problem. The question is whether or not to engage with ministers who represent these far-right parties. And so far, the Biden administration hasn't taken a decision on this. They have fired a shot across the bow with the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, warning the Israelis that they would be held to policies and would be judged on that, and giving that warning not at the traditional Israel lobby in Washington, AIPAC, but at the lobby, the alternative lobby, J Street, which represents the more liberal parts of Israeli society.
All right, James, thank you so much for the update. As always, have a great week.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Listeners are reminded you can check James's articles on www.jamesmdorsey.net.